Good evening. So, tonight's story from the Old Testament is to me, one of the weirdest and perhaps most unsettling stories in the Old Testament. There are a handful of them. You can probably think of some of them, but I want you to see this, and I want to put it in the context in which it exists and help you to understand why it's there, why God recorded it for us, and then draw some lessons out of it. That's really the purpose of this, is that of all of the things that happened in human history, God sought to record everything we have in this book was by God's direct design and his direct intention. It is not there by accident. And so it is there, we believe, according to the New Testament, that it is there for our instruction, that through the endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. Even through a hopeless time that's recorded here, we might have hope. Now this is 2 Kings chapter 6, beginning in verse 24. 2 Kings chapter 6, beginning in verse 24. It says that afterward, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered his entire army and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria as they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a kav of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. What it's saying there is that the famine was of such severity that even the lowest quality of food was ridiculously pricey. A donkey's carcass would typically not be eaten because it was not a clean animal, and it was such that the donkey's head, which is the worst part of the donkey, was sold for, it says, 80 shekels, which amounts to about 2 pounds of silver. You can just imagine how long ago this was, 2 pounds of silver to pay for this terrible piece of food. I just paid 2 pounds of silver for this donkey's head, and you're going to eat it. I just imagine Mom at dinner that night. You have no idea how much I paid for this. And then, for breakfast, dove's dung. Now, that sounds strange, but it is known that throughout history, during times of extreme famine and pestilence, people would resort to eating the excrement of various animals even. And you think about the cost of this. It was 5 shekels, which is about 50 grams of silver for a fourth of a quart of dove's dung. So it's just a bad scenario. That's the point of that. Now, it's about to get worse. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And by the way, the king is Jehoram, and this is Ahab's son. Now, he's not a good man, but even what he's about to witness causes him to recoil. She cries out, "Help, O Lord, my king." And he said, "If the Lord will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" The point there is, we are all in this great distress. The only one who could help any of us is God, and he is not doing that. So how could I help you? Would you like me to draw something from the threshing floor? Because guess what? There's nothing there. Would you like me to draw something from the winepress? Guess what? There's nothing there. That's the point. And the king asked her, "What's your trouble?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give me your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And on the next day I said to her, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she's hidden her son." And when the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now, he was passing by on the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath on his body. Now, what you can imagine is, in ancient times, in these cities, the walls were such that they were constructed around the entirety of the city, and they were not, it wasn't a wall like at the border of Mexico, but it was a wall that you could walk on, almost like the Great Wall of China, that kind of a wall. And he was up there on top of this wall, and perhaps these ladies' houses were built right into it, and so he passed them. And the people are down below, and they see the king. They see that he's wearing sackcloth, not as his outer garments, but as his undergarments, which means he is in a degree of mourning just because of the general state of Israel at the time. And they could recognize that, and they could see it. And this is where the story really is. Notice what he says. He says, "May God do so to me and more also." Now, he tore his clothes. He tore his clothes, and then he said, "May God do so to me and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." Now, I just want you to look at the scenario and back out and ask the question. What is it that is happening in the land of Israel during this time that has spurred this great famine? What is the reason for the distress? Well, go back in your Old Testament history all the way back to when the kingdom was torn in two because the sons of Solomon decided to worship idols. And there's the kingdom to the north and the kingdom to the south. And the people have been repeatedly pursuing after idols in the land and spurning the commandment of God, rejecting it outright. Consider the ministry of Elijah. We looked at Elijah passing the baton to Elisha. And Elisha is now this new man, and you saw the rejection that there was for the prophetic ministry from the moment that Elisha became the new prophet. The people just had a general disdain for the prophetic office. And the young men told him, they said, "Go up, Baldy, go up." Maybe an allusion to Elijah, who had just gone up into heaven. And maybe they were saying, "You go up too. You get out of here too." But either way, they were mocking, and there was a disdain. And this was the state of things. Israel had rejected God, and they'd rejected his command. And God has brought on them great famine. And when you have a people, imagine this. Here's what we need to see. When you have a people who no longer have God as their guiding light, when you have a people who've rejected the words of God, who've rejected covenant with God, who've rejected the commands of God, the oracles of God, when those things are rejected, then imagine what happens within a society and a civilization that has said, "God, we want nothing to do with you," and then they enter into a time of great physical duress. Imagine the difficulties of a people with conscience and a people with God's Spirit and a people with an understanding of God's law to go through a time of great turmoil and trial and the temptations that exist even for people of conscience. Now imagine a people who've said to God, "We do not want you. We do not want your word. We do not want your commands." Then they resort to the kinds of things like what had happened between these two ladies. And here's what I want you to understand about this. God gave good warning. You remember last week, or it was the week before, when we were looking at the story of these bears that came out of the woods, and it says they tore the young men. Does it mean they killed them? Perhaps not. I think they might have gotten a good licking and were sent home and explained to their families what had happened. But where did that story come from and why was it there? You go back to the Pentateuch. You go back to the Torah. Go back to the law. Go back to the commands of God. And we looked at how God told the people, if you reject me, then even the wild beasts will attack you. And God warned them of this. And we see this played out throughout biblical history. Well, I want you to turn in your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 28. I just want you to see, because this came well before this time. This was given by Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 28. This is prior to Israel entering the land. This is prior to them having the period of the judges. It's prior to the kings. It's prior to Samuel. This is the law, and God is giving this to his people who still have not experimented in the world yet. And God says this in Deuteronomy chapter 28, beginning in verse 52, and I want you to see how well this aligns with the story in 2 Kings chapter 6 that we just read. It says, and actually before we read verse 52, go look at verse 15, because that's where this long sermon begins. But in verse 15, he says, if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all of these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. All right? And then he lays these out. Now look in verse 52. They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. Notice, Ben-Hadad, the king of Samaria, is besieging Samaria during a time of great tribulation for them. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout your land, which the Lord your God has given you. And you shall eat, look at this, God says this, you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to the wife he embraces, and to the last of the children whom he has left, so that he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing else left. In the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in all your towns, the most tender and refined woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground, because she's so delicate and tender, will begrudge to the husband she embraces, to her son and to her daughter, her afterbirth that comes out from between her feet, and her children whom she bears, because lacking everything she will eat them secretly in the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in your towns. God gave fair warning. Now, you have the story in Kings. The story is repeated during the siege of, I believe, Nebuchadnezzar, and it's mentioned in Lamentations chapter 4 and verse 10. And it was repeated again in history when Titus went in, the great Roman conqueror, went into Jerusalem in AD 70 and besieged it. And this was a long process. And I was reading in Josephus's writings, he has a lengthy statement of a story that is very much like what we read here in 2 Kings 6, of a woman doing the very same thing, and how all of Israel grieved over it and recoiled as in their great distress in the midst of this. Now, why is this here? What are we intended to see? What we're intended to see is that when a people abandons God and abandons their love for Him and rejects Him outright, then there's nothing that could then be off limits. When a people no longer has that place of orientation, to that waypoint, that sense of direction, when they reject God, then they will resort to all kinds of things like this. Now, here's the critical point for me and you today. This king of Samaria, Jehoram, when he saw what these ladies were doing, and we now know why were they doing it? Because of a consequence that was the result of their disobedience. Their disobedience brought the curse of God. And then, in that conscienceless state, they resorted to things that even a pagan would look at and recoil. And the king of Samaria, seeing it, who did he point the finger at? Elisha. Can you imagine that? There's this great and awful thing happening in the land. The distress in all of it is terrible and it's awful. And he sees it and he said, God, do so to me and more if by the end of this day the head of Elisha isn't before me. Why? Why does he think this? Because so often when there are consequences that are the results of our own wickedness, what do human beings wish to do with it? Pass the buck. Pass the buck. Where does that statement come from? Maybe in the 1800s during a game of poker, when the dealer would advance, at the neck you would give a buck knife over to him, and now he's the one that has responsibility. And when his turn is done, he doles responsibility to the next guy, and we pass the buck. Adam and Eve did it from the beginning. Adam sinned, and God came to him, and he said, "It was the woman that you gave me." Eve sinned, and she said, "It was the serpent. It was his fault." You see it here. You see it in Ahab, when Ahab said to Elijah, when he finally saw him, he said, "Is it you, you great troubler of Israel?" Imagine the reason why Israel is under such troublesome times is because they rejected God. But because Elijah was standing in the gap, and Elisha now is standing in the gap, it's an easy target to say, you're the reason why it is this way. But really what should be seen is, no, the reason why it is this way is because we have collectively rejected God. And so the lesson is simply to go to God in remorse, to repent. And you see God throughout the Old Testament giving people many second chances, including Ahab, who when he repented, truly when he repented, what did God do? God relented of the curse that he was going to bring on him. God is a good God, but the lesson here in the Kings and in Deuteronomy and the lesson from this king of Samaria is, number one, don't shoot the messenger. Number two, don't blame shift. Number three, take responsibility for your own actions. Number four, remember, I don't know if it was Job that said it, shall we accept the blessings of God and not the curses? Number five, repent before God in true humility. When there's a stir-up, when there is something happening, don't be quick to make a judgment. Because what was happening was, imagine if you had Jehoram and almost all of Israel over here, all these people over here, and they're all together. And then there's this one guy standing over here, Elisha, and Elisha's the direct messenger who's warning about these things. Then who is the easy person to blame in that? We're all together, you're the one that said it, so point a finger here. But really what God was wanting them to learn was the reason why things are the way that they are is because of your own sins. And so God always gives fair warning. And what I really hope you see, and what I want to encourage you with, is as you're reading through the Bible and you come to stories like this, what in the world? Why is this here? so much of it is established beforehand. The law was given first, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So much is in that. There's so much that God said in great detail. Go read through Deuteronomy. It's a big sermon. Go read it. God says this is what will happen. And you know, you and I today are living in a world where there are certain atrocities. We look on them and we wonder, how in the world could this ever happen? I don't know if you saw what happened in California yesterday, the bombing at the IVF clinic. And what was interesting to me, and I think this is very fitting, was that there are a number of Christians that are pushing against aspects of IVF because of the embryo disposals that happen. And so because that's a known thing, then when the bombing happened, there were a lot of people that immediately said it must have been Christians, and then they began pointing fingers at Christians and giving lots of allegations against Christians. Turns out it was not a Christian. A true Christian wouldn't do that. It was a person who was a self-described mortalist. He said that he believes that the best thing for the world is for all people to go away. And he rejects God completely on his face. I thought it was interesting. We have this darkness. Why would somebody do something like that? It's so easy to say it's a Christian. No, it's not. What you and I, when we look out into this darkness, what we need to do and continue to be is a bright beacon of light. And so we must stand together in covenant with our God, love Him, adore Him, hold to the ancient paths, hold to the ancient standards, welcome people in, bring them into the fold, teach them the ways of God. The curses that we see around us today, it's not because of Christians. Curses are not due to obedience. Curses are due to rebellion and disobedience. And so, if we must bear some of these consequences along with the rest of the world, all we can do is be humble, walk humbly before God, continue to shine His light, speak His word plainly, love Jesus, love mankind, love our enemies, show the world the gospel. God, on repeat through the Old Testament, will take people out of the kind of darkness that you see in the kings, and He will forgive even those who've done some of these atrocities. He'll forgive them and receive them into His fold so long as they will just come to Him humbly. So let's be in covenant together, let's encourage each other, and let's look forward to a great day of glory and set the example for the world. If you have any need at all, you can let it be known while we stand and while we sing.